Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Rails Board meeting. I am Renee Leyva, President of the Rails Board. I hereby call this meeting to order on Friday, March 28th, 2025 at 1 o'clock. Emily, could you please call roll?
Sure. Monica Caldecott. Jean Carroll.
Here.
Jennifer Cutshall.
Here.
Glenn Gregory. Here. Diane Hollister. Jennifer Hovanek.
Here.
Amanda Kowalski.
Here.
Renee Leyva.
Here.
Julie Millivek.
Here.
Emily Porter. Emily might be on an iPhone that I'm,
What I was gonna say, it just popped up.
we'll see. Carolyn Sennett. Alex Vancina.
Here.
Karen Voidick.
Here.
Catherine Yanikowski. We have a quorum.
All right, good. Thank you, Emily. Next is the recognition of guests and announcements, and we will take care of the public comments at the same time.
Monica Harris, Rails.
Sharon Swanson, Rails.
Bill Philippek, Rails.
Emily Feister Rails.
Amy Hall, Rails. Layla Heath, Rails.
Dan Boston, Rails.
Pam Slaughter, Rails.
Brian Smith, Rails.
Ola Dronsky, Rails.
Laura Nemeth, Rails.
Tom Kazia, Rails.
Jessica C. Bob, Rails. Nikki Zimmerman, Rails.
Full room today. All right. Emily, could you please read the names of the guests attending via Zoom?
Yes, we have Brian Hebel, Kendall Orison, Sam Daly, Mark Hatch, Barb Miller, and Demond Warfield.
Thank you. And then did we receive any public comments through email or via Zoom?
Ah,
And then one last one. Are there any other public comments at this time before we proceed? All right, great. Let us move on to the consent agenda, which consists of the adoption of the agenda, the Rails Board minutes of February 28th, 2025, the regular meeting, the Rails Board minutes of February 28th, 2025, the closed session meeting, and the approval of the disbursements with Ms. Sharon Swanson, February 2025. Does anyone wish to move any item from the consent agenda to the regular agenda for further discussion? All right, and then just to mention, we're just going to shift something. In order to accommodate the state library, we will move agenda item 8.4, the IMLS impacts in Illinois, to directly follow the regular Illinois State Library report. Agenda item 7.4. If there are no other changes, may I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as revised?
Move, Jen.
Thanks, John.
Second.
second.
Wait, who are the two?
Catherine simultaneously.
Catherine, I'll go with you. Just, all right, Glenn. All right, and then Emily, can you please call roll?
Jean Carroll,
Yes.
Jennifer Cutshall,
Yes.
Glenn Gregory, Jennifer Hovanek, Amanda Kowalski.
Yeah.
Julie Millivek,
Yes.
Emily Porter,
Yes.
Carolyn Sennett,
Yes.
Alex Vancina,
Yes.
Karen Voidick,
Here.
Catherine Yanikowski,
Yes.
and Renee Leyva.
Yes. Next, we have Sharon Swanson with the financial report. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Renee.
Hello.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start off the February 28th general fund unassigned cash and investment balance was approximately 29.4 million at the end of February. This would fund 24.9 months of budgeted fiscal year 2025 operations, so a little under 25 months of cash coverage that we have on hand. General fund revenues through February were just a little over 16.1 million, and these were approximately 1.34 million above budget. And of course, this was primarily due to our receiving the federal portion of our area per capita grant as of February 20th. This was a little over $1.9 million. Thank you to the State Library for all of their efforts to make that happen, and also the Secretary of State. And with this receipt, we have received the full amount of our fiscal year 2025 grant. So everything is wrapped up for this fiscal year revenue-wise for us. But we did have, in addition to this, above budget investment income. So the Federal Reserve, once again, at their March meeting, held interest rates steady. But they indicated a more confident prediction for 0.25 percentage point cuts during the second half of calendar year 2025. And we've seen interest rates for our money market accounts declining to percentages that are closer to the Federal Reserve's key borrowing rates. It's signaling more certainty about those cuts coming at the end of our calendar year. Rails had additionally $213,625 of unbudgeted special grant funding beyond our area and per capita grant funds. These funds were to support the ongoing development and enhancement of L2 and the World Language Cataloging Services Program. We also had above budget revenues. We also had below budget revenues from the selection of EBSCO as the vendor for the statewide database program, which was done after our budget was finalized. And we had that revision to the LSAP support grant for that open RSA position that was eliminated. That effectively lowers the amount that RSA will reimburse to Rails for our support service cost. And moving on to expenditures, Rails's general fund expenditures through February were just over 10.63 million. And these were approximately 1.66 million below budget, primarily due to the EBSCO group purchase mentioned above, because the expenditures offset the revenues 1-to-1. We also have below budget contractual services expenditures from having received no applications for the first round of cataloging membership grants for libraries to join LSAPs. The second application period closes on April 15th, and Rails fully expects to expend the majority, if not all, of the $140,000 that we had budgeted during the second application period, which is great news. And we did also in this category budget for My Library Is grants. And Rails is anticipating awarding all of the $100,000 of the grant funds that we had budgeted for this as well. So that is also great news. There is a normal week's delay in receiving and paying our delivery outsourcing vendor, as I've mentioned in prior months, which causes a little bit of a variance between budget and actual in this category as well. And we continue to have favorable gas prices, which are affecting both our fuel prices and our expenditures that we're seeing in that area, as well as our expenditures for our delivery outsourcing contractor, because we reimburse them for the fuel that they use as a part of their delivery service for us. And moving on, we had below budget vehicle expenditures from the fuel item that I mentioned, as well as decreased repairs and maintenance beyond what we had budgeted due to our ability to and are replacing over half of our delivery fleet. We also had below budget travel expenditures. This was just normal delays in receiving reimbursement requests from staff, as well as some scheduling changes for some staff who had anticipated attending some out-of-state events and were unable to. For instance, we had budgeted for Joe to attend the ER&L conference, which was an out-of-state event, and he was unable to just because of scheduling concerns. There were timing differences for in-state and out-of-state travel since conference dates some of them were firmed up after we finalized the budget as well. And we had budgeted for the planned joint systems board meeting, which ended up not happening, and travel expenditures related to that. And we also had less than anticipated travel for the July board orientation meeting that we had. We also had below budget professional services expenditures. This was just timing differences for several projects that we had budgeted for, including succession planning, which is on today's agenda for you all, a planned website accessibility audit, and planned legal expenditures for both our labor relations and our policy committee work that's happening and continues to happen during the last portion of the fiscal year. We also have below budget personnel expenditures. This is just normal recruitment delays. So we've had 3 positions that are now all filled: the library resource specialist, the temporary cataloging services assistant, and a temporary communications intern, which was just filled this last week, which is also great news. And I did want to mention, we did have a little bit of activity in our capital projects fund. We purchased the appliances for the kitchenette renovation at Coal Valley, which is happening. And we should, we did pay for the remaining renovation work to our contractor in March. So you will be seeing that appear in your March financials. And then I want to open up for any questions that you all may have.
All right, thank you so much, Sharon. If we don't have any questions or concerns, let's move on to reports. I don't have a report for under the Rails president. I just have a comment. I just want to thank the Schaumburg Township District Library for hosting our members update. And what a beautiful library. It was nice to see it was well attended by members and Rail staff. Let's see, in your packet included the committee reports. Does anyone have any questions or comments regarding their contents?
The next policy committee meeting is actually on April 17th.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, if there's no comments, let's move on to the Rails monthly report. Monica, you have the floor.
Thank you, Renee. Good afternoon, all. So in your packet, you received a report that did include some updates related to the Institute of Museum and Library Services updates. We do have that on our agenda coming up soon, so we'll save most of the discussion for that agenda item. I do want to thank Greg McCormick, Director at the State Library, for joining us today for that discussion. As you saw in our report, there was also an ISLAC meeting that was scheduled yesterday in Springfield. I was able to attend that meeting. So there were several things discussed, including Ann Slaughter, along with Troy Brown from the Illinois Heartland Library System, gave an update on Illinois Library's broadband equity, access, and deployment related to a grant application that we're hoping to be able to submit. And that was a great discussion. The State Library presented an overview of OCLC First Search and WorldCat Discovery subscription. There was a discussion of the impact of the Public Library Per Capita and Equalization Aid Grants Program. A further discussion about the multilingual collections update, which I know I had mentioned to you in the past. Because of changes at the federal level, the state has not moved forward with that program. And so we'll wait to hear any updates on that for future years. There was also a fiscal year 26 Secretary of State budget for library grants discussion. And the Illinois State Libraries Advisory Committee did some member reports and talked about future meetings coming up in 2025. So I know Greg has a report a bit later, but it was a very good discussion. We took the full 3 hours, lots of conversation about especially the IMLS grants to states program and the way that that impacts the budget. And I think there'll be lots to share as we talk more about that moving forward. I did want to call your attention to a few other things in the report. We did give you a link to the bill monitoring list that the Illinois Library Association keeps in terms of the legislative updates that are shared. They just updated that list again just a couple days ago. So if you looked at that before that, I would encourage you to look again. All bills that are submitted were expected to be submitted by March 20th. So everything that you see there should be anything that's being discussed by the legislature in this current term. So we will continue to look and see where those updates come from. I did also give you just a smattering of bills, but as we note, there were over 100 that were being considered by the committee, and we're looking forward to hearing more about how those move forward from ILA. I also wanted to remind you, if you received an email from Emily noting that you should be receiving a statement of economic interest soon and you have not received it, please make sure that you let Emily know as soon as possible. If you have received it, just a reminder that those are due on or before May 1st. So if you don't want to keep receiving those updates from the state encouraging you to complete them, please go ahead and do so.
And also, I need a copy because we send it in with our per capita grant to the state.
Emily. I wanted to call your attention to a few really interesting things that are happening at Rails, including the launch of that Numbers for That Count campaign. Some of you may have seen some of those pieces coming out through social media, and that is an opportunity to help members to understand the impact that the library systems and Rails have on its members, the things that we do, and we're kind of breaking that down into individual services and trying to offer that in a kind of biteable way. This is part of our general efforts to make sure that our membership really understands what the systems do and the impacts that the systems have in terms of being able to support libraries throughout Illinois. We also received 69 My Library Is grant applications, which is wonderful. There's a breakdown in your packet that kind of goes through all the library types, but we did receive grant applications from all types of libraries. And requested was a total of $263,865. So we're going to be looking through those. They are under review by the grant review team. And I want to thank the grant review team for all the work that they do in reviewing those grants. I'm sure there will be more to share soon. We have also awarded grants for our continuing education event grants. Those were awarded in February 2025, and there was a list in your packet that shares which ones were reviewed, but I want to encourage you please to take a look at the L2 calendar, see if any of them fit with your schedule or you have an interest in attending some really great events that were submitted. So I want to thank so many of our members for submitting such great ideas. Finally, we did want to be able to offer an update on the RSA Independence Project. Joe is leading a lot of the efforts on the rail side from that, so I asked him to speak to this piece.
Thank you, Monica. Good afternoon, all. So this is mentioned briefly in your report. We have shared some updates certainly previously regarding the RSA Independence Project, but we wanted to share some information with you today. So just as a reminder, RSA is the last of our LSAPs to be operated with rail staff members, and they are now in the middle of their independence project. So all other consortia are operating independently from rails, and their LSAP support grant that we award each year is provided to them as a direct payment rather than an allocation of staff and services, as is the case for RSA. So RSA is currently in phase 2 of their independence project, which is the transition to directly employing RSA staff. So internally, RSA had set a sort of deadline of July 1st of 2025 as their anticipated cutover date for that direct employment of RSA staff. And we're talking roughly 10 staff members when we talk about RSA staffing. However, despite guidance to the contrary and the RSA sort of status as a tax exempt municipal entity, they were given guidance that would suggest that they would not be required to change their employer identification number. Since receiving that guidance, they were informed, or the process has started, that their EIN number is being reviewed by the IRS for possible change or reissuance. So the fact that there is some uncertainty right now on both the timeline and the outcome of this review, in our discussions, both RSA and rails, we thought, given that uncertainty and for the best interest really of all parties, we're in agreement of sort of pushing that staffing deadline transition date to January 1st of 2026. It's important to note that this should not impact the deadline that was given to RSA originally, which is July 1st of 2026 as a overall completion date for their independence project. So this sort of transition date change was communicated in several ways over the past month. That includes both at the RSA board level, obviously informing RSA staff, informing the rest of rail staff, and I think just this week informing RSA members and sharing with the rails board today. Just as it was for the other LSAPs like Swan and Prairie Cat 4 who underwent this transition, it's obviously a big undertaking, and we're very grateful for the work of Kendall Orison, Anthony Dieter, and the rest of the RSA team, the work they've done to date, and obviously the work that continues. Also want to acknowledge our own Sam Daly, our HR director, who's giving RSA a lot of support on the staffing transition front. Rails, of course, is committed to supporting RSA in every way that we can to make sure that this is a successful transition. We'll, of course, be sharing more updates with you all in the year ahead, but we did want to give you that update today. Happy to take any questions or comments, unless they're questions about EINs or the IRS, and in which case I can find an 800 number for you. I know we have Kendall out there and he's free today as well if anybody had any questions you wanted to direct to Kendall, but that is the update today to share. Thank you, everybody.
Concludes my report. Are there any questions about anything you saw here, anything that you'd like to ask questions or comments about today?
All right, let's move on. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Joe. Let's move on to Dan Bostrom with an overview of the communications and marketing.
Yeah, and actually, I'm gonna stand right here just for a second because you should all have this document in your board packet. What I did here today is I invited the rest of the team to come and talk a little bit about what we do here at Rails. So, you know, my role as Director of Marketing Communications is to just think strategically about how we disseminate information, both externally and externally. But really, these folks are the ones that are closest to members, who are in the communication channels, talking with members every single day. So I wanted to go one by one to a chance for you all to get them to meet them a little bit. You will notice that we have, as actually Sharon mentioned, Gwen just joined us last week, and she's unfortunately not here today, but you'll probably see her name in the emails and things like that too. So let's start with Ola. Would you kick us off?
I'm gonna follow Emily's rules and sit at the table.
Ola.
Welcome. So hi, I'm Ola Gronsky. I'm the digital marketing and communication specialist here. I've been at Rails for 2.5 years now. As the title suggests, I do everything digital. So if it has something to do with a camera or you see it on a screen, I probably helped work on it. And that involves obviously managing all of our social media platforms, but also taking photos at our events, either the ones we host here, or sometimes I go out with Jessica for site visits. I also create all of our video content and our regular series like Rails Minute and the Can't Shelve This podcast. And then lastly, I also design some of the stuff in our store and manage that platform. So if anyone has merch ideas, I'm happy to hear it. I'll take them as suggestions. I won't say yes right away, Renee. But yeah, my background's in public libraries, so it's been really cool to be here at Rails, still in the library world, but from a different perspective, and it's been really great.
Thank you.
Jessica's next.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jessica Silva. I am the member engagement specialist. So I do all things members, coordinate networking groups. I organize member meetups. I conduct site visits. So for that I've done recently, Elk Grove High School, Richton Park Public Library. I went to the Leather Archive and Museum. Yesterday, we got to go to the Art Institute, which was really cool. And also visited Cheney's Grove Public recently too. And I share resources with the libraries and get to see their spaces, take photos. If you'd like to see more of the site visits, you can check out the site visit map on the Rails website. I also organize online roundtables and various events for members to connect. So I wanted to share some upcoming events we have, which should be going out to everyone soon. So we're having an academic and school librarian virtual mixer on April 24th at 4 p.m. An online roundtable about special events, anniversaries, celebrations, and milestones. And the folks from the McHenry County Library Lovers Expedition are going to present about their passport project that they did. Nature and Libraries Networking Group kickoff meeting, excited about that. And we're having another member meetup at the Bourbonnais Public Library, May 28th at 2 p.m. Also facilitate the My Library Is grant, and we're in the process of reviewing. That should come out really soon. I'm excited to award those grants. And my background is mostly school librarianship, a little bit in faculty libraries. So I really enjoy this position, getting to work with all different sorts of libraries and visit my favorite places. So, yep.
Thank you, Jessica.
And I'm Brian Smith. My job title is Applications and Web Developer, which I think is kind of scary because I just call myself a librarian who builds websites. I'm one of the old timers at Rails, one of the few employees who was working at one of the systems before the 2011 merger. I began working at the Prairie Area Library System in 2006. Back then, I did more consulting and continuing education and worked with the Prairie Cat Consortium. And as things got towards the merger, then I got a new job as being the website guy. And that's pretty much what I do here. I manage, improve, build additional things, try to make our websites easier to use. That includes the Rails, main Rails website. We have several service-specific websites, for example, for Explore More Illinois. And also, even though it's not a Rails website, We're also the managers and hosts of the Library Directory and Learning Calendar L2 website. And so I'm the primary maintainer, work with our outside developers on that too. And I do various other things, help people when they have problems with the websites, represent Rails at certain conferences, and pretty much answer any question that comes to me, even though the answer may be, oh, wait, you need to talk to so-and-so instead of me. And that's in short what I'm doing here.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi, next up is me, I guess. So I'm Nicole Zimmerman. Most people call me Nikki, except my boss. And just to make sure that I'm, sound like I'm being scolded all the time. I'm kidding. So I celebrated my 8th anniversary last month. Time flies when you have a pandemic in the middle there. So besides keeping everyone on their toes with the proper use of the Oxford comma, and adhering to our brand standards, the bulk of my responsibilities lie in 3 areas. So that would be producing the Rails e-news weekly, doing graphic design for print materials, and things to do with conferences. So the e-news that you see every week comes from several sources. Our staff provides me with the news that they want me to include. I get weekly, I get from Continuing Ed and Deals and Discounts, and then, also the executive levels too, and then less often, I should say, from other departments. And then aside from staff, I also compile news and programs that is of interest to libraries from outside Rails. So I gather information from our member libraries, from partner organizations like, ILA, IL, Carly, et cetera, and even just other organizations and businesses. And I take all of that and I rewrite everything to our standards, our style standards. We use the Chicago Manual of Style, and hopefully put it all in nice bite-sized digestible bits for everyone to read. My second major responsibility is producing printed marketing materials. So whereas Ola does digital, I mostly do print. And right now the big project is the rebranding for Explore More Illinois. So I'm working on posters and bookmarks and things like that. And that's always fun to do. And the third major component to my job is prepping for conferences and smaller events. So whether it's something little like making sure Jessica has, pens and screen cloths for her site visits, or, something for CE programs or networking events. I just make sure to gather swag and printed material, sometimes create those items for something. And then, of course, the bigger thing is managing the booth planning for the annual conferences that we attend, ILA, IL, things like that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki.
Can we answer any questions?
If you ever need a salesperson, Nikki does a wonderful job. At the conference, I remember her trying to tell people how to utilize the little microfiber and it was like a shampoo commercial. It was amazing. But as a person who supports marketing all the way, I'm your #1 fan. And let me just tell you, your jobs are very difficult because of the fact that for the amount of things that Rails does, you have to somehow give everything to the members and say, here, try and read everything and hopefully you figure it out. Thank you so much for all the work. And I know for a fact that I criticize a lot and Ola gets usually those emails more than, and thank you so much for, you can all notice it. Yeah, thank you again. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Just forgot to say that next month will be here.
Yes. Already?
Goes fast.
All right. Again, thanks again. Next, we were gonna go to Greg with the report from the State Library. Hello, Greg.
Hi, thank you. And it's nice to see everyone today. I think may change a bit of the agenda as I get through my report is what I understand. But we'll see. So much of what you're going to hear initially at first is what Monica has just shared with you. Similarly to what was discussed at ISLAC, what Rails is watching, we too have been doing that since the last board meeting and even before in regards to legislation, its potential impact on libraries. We work very closely with the Secretary's Legislative Office in reviewing virtually any bill that is filed and could have an impact on libraries and may have to make comment on that. Additionally, we are in the midst of budget development and moving forward through the legislative process with the Secretary's ask for the entire his entire operation, but also certainly the grants that support library and literacy programs through our department. His budget hearings are scheduled for April, both in the House and in the Senate. And I'm not going to give any dates because that is always subject to change. So, but it will occur in April. Currently, on the grant side of things within the office, we are finalizing review of the FY25 Public Library Per Capita and Equalization Grants. We had complete participation by all public libraries in that program again this year, which is always a good thing to see, as well as review of public library construction grants, the small appropriation that we have for $870,000 to fund programs throughout Illinois. The big driver, I think, with grant programs and budget as we move into fiscal year 2026 is certainly the more recent news out of the federal government regarding the Institute of Museum and Library Services. I would guess that most of you in the room today received the Secretary's message regarding that situation, the executive order, and its potential implications for the state. That is funding that you are aware that the two regional library systems are in need of to support their operations, and that is targeted specifically toward delivery. We allocate $2.5 million of that, our $5.7 million toward that effort every year to Heartland and Rails, for the total that is given to the two regionals and Chicago library system. It exceeds $18.3 million. But that $2.5 million is an essential piece. So we are certainly following this very closely on where we are now. And Monica, I don't know how much more you want me to go into at this point, because we could go quite a while on this topic.
Well, and I know if we have moved the IMLS discussion, Greg, to
Okay.
immediately follow the report. So we can, if you have other pieces you want to share instead.
I think we can segue right into that. If I think that's the piece that's of most interest. So in addition to that, we expend funding for the OCLC WorldCat Discovery and First Search Services. That is a piece of the OCLC services that 1,000 libraries in the state utilize or can utilize on top of their cataloging and interlibrary loan services. We fund the Public Library Trustee Training Portal, the iLead portal, which has been developed by the Illinois Heartland Library System, but certainly Rails has played a role in that development as well. the Illinois Library Presents initiative receives $100,000 in funding from our federal allocation. We fund Project Next Generation grants. Our grant to the Illinois Department of Corrections to support collection development at the 28 state correctional centers, which had not been done for quite some time, is now funded with funding from the IMLS and through our office. Our continuing education programs with the Illinois Library Association, Directors University being one of them, is also funded with this money. Right now, any grant recipient from our FY24 allotment, which we have in hand and have been expended, anytime we are asked about this issue, those programs are moving forward. That is from the same allotment that was mentioned earlier in the financial report that we were able to draw down and allocate to the 2 regional library systems for your FY25 operations. We do have preliminary information from IMLS that our FY25 allotment, which we would expend next state fiscal year, should be received in the same or a very similar amount to what we received this year. That barring any, other circumstance or review at the federal level that might change that. But that is what the notice that we have received to date. We do not have that award yet in hand. But the secretary, I want to assure everyone, is putting a lot of resource behind this. In state as well with his legislative staff, looking at, what is the entire bigger picture on this and how is this addressed for our state. It is quite different in Illinois than it is in other states under the Grants to States program. In many other states, a significant portion of that funding goes directly to the state library's own operation. And while they might be affecting statewide services with that, it does employ staff, maybe even collections, other types of things that is very different here. Really, the only thing we're procuring of significance here is the OCLC WorldCat Discovery and First Search platform for Illinois libraries. The rest is considered grant money. That doesn't mean, though, that there are not, employees and people tied to that, certainly at the library systems and maybe to a smaller extent at some of the grant recipients under the Project Next Generation program. But it is a very different landscape. But also included in the of concern, for Illinois, that is the funding that does not flow through this office. In fiscal year 2024, over $2.4 million went to other efforts under the National Leadership Program and the Laura Bush Librarians for the 21st Century program. The Chicago Public Library was very involved in some of that funding. The university at Urbana-Champaign, along with the Public Library Association, had a joint effort that would impact libraries across the entire nation. And several other grant recipients, including an archives group here in the state of Illinois, had a substantial grant from that allocation. Moving forward, what must occur at the very least is that if everything does come through for FY25, there must be a restoration of the authority for the Museum and Library Services Act under IMLS that is authorized in 5-year cycles. That authority does expire on September 30th. That would need to be granted by Congress and approved by the current administration, but also an appropriation will be necessary for further funding of programs through IMLS. So I know Monica probably has some information to share. Each of the library systems, the Illinois Library Association, ALA, every library, everyone has sent messaging regarding this. We're trying to address this as we can as an elected state office as well. So
Thank you so much, Greg, for that. And I know our board members likely have some questions for you as well. I just wanted to share a little bit with the board about the Rails response, just to make sure that you're aware of what we've done so far to communicate some of them. So as Greg mentioned, this executive order first became available late on March 14th. And so we were in conversation over the weekend with the state library, who kept us very aware of things that they knew were happening. We also were in discussion with Carly, ILA, Chicago Public, and Heartland to kind of share our messaging that we were developing so that we could kind of hit the ground running on Monday. So you probably saw there was a message that sort of immediately went out via the Rails news article piece that was encouraging folks to advocate on behalf of IMLS, along with sharing some of the information that we had via ILA about the way that IMLS impacts services throughout Illinois, but especially through the grants to states programs and how it affects Rails. We also recorded our Rails Minute on Monday, which was then shared that Wednesday, the very first segment of which was really focused on IMLS and an understanding of what people should know and how they could stay informed with a lot of national organizations that are continuing to share. For those of you who want to know some organizations to make sure that you're staying engaged with, we definitely encourage you to follow that Show Up for Libraries campaign from ALA, where they're sharing a lot of information. Every library has made a lot of information available. The American Alliance of Museums, which is a national organization that's focused on museum support because museums are also affected by IMLS, have been sharing a lot of really great information as soon as it's available, which is really helpful. One thing I want to make sure that you all are aware of is just some of the impacts that can happen even sort of beyond some of the federal legislation pieces that we all know we need to stay abreast with. And that is about the importance of continuing to communicate with state legislators and local legislators, because they are very curious about how this is going to affect their local library or different things that are happening across Illinois. Many of you probably saw some of the news about what happened in New Hampshire recently. So for those of you who don't know, in New Hampshire, somebody proposed sort of to go along with IMLS cuts that maybe the State Library of New Hampshire should also be cut, that maybe there wasn't a need for that anymore. So the folks supporting those libraries in New Hampshire got immediately involved, so that there were over 3,400 emails that were received by local state legislators from people who cared a lot about the services that were offered to libraries across New Hampshire by their state library. And that plan was pulled back very quickly because we need to make sure that people who support libraries and people that know how to reach folks and let them know that these things are important to them. So I know that you all should have received that email that came from the Secretary of State. That includes the calls to action that are there. So the first one is about raising awareness. It's making sure that people know the issues at hand, that they know how to speak to these issues when they come up in their local communities and local libraries, that they understand the actual impacts that the cutting these services and federal programs has. But it's also about making your voice heard. And I think one of the great things that I took away from the conversation that we had at ISLAC and with the state library is that it's certainly about local libraries or library systems, making sure people are aware, but it has to go beyond that to have real impact. Many of you are trustees. Make sure that your fellow trustees are aware of and know these issues. Many of you represent libraries. Make sure that the folks that are working at your libraries libraries understand and know the impacts that federal funding for libraries has. Because the more that people understand it, I think the more that they're able to speak to it in a way that people can understand. So we will continue to make sure that we're sharing the information as we receive it and as things change. But as Greg said, I think, you know, outside of making sure that the state library receives the money that's sort of statutorily required to be sent to them by April 22nd, and that has been promised to them, beyond that, there is that September deadline that is really, really important, because once that expires, in order for there to be funding in the future, Congress has to vote on that again this year. So we want to make sure that we're keeping those deadlines in mind, and that we're making sure that this is sort of top of mind for Rails members and sort of across the board. So I did want to open it up because I know I've heard from a lot of you this week, and I really appreciate the comments and questions that folks have had, but I wanted us to be able to have some time to discuss here in our meeting in case you had things you wanted to share or ask.
Do we know of any interesting ways that the libraries are getting the word out to their own patrons about speaking up to their respective Congress people?
I think that's a good question, Catherine. I've certainly seen some social media posting, but in terms of like additional interesting ways that I have identified in terms of Rails members, I don't have a lot top of mind. I don't know if anybody else from the Rails team has any to share. No. But we'll keep those in mind, certainly.
Wondering if something could be put into the books as they're delivered, you know, when they're on hold, kind of helping people understand how those got there. But I don't know whether libraries are libraries allowed to do that? Is that considered campaigning? I mean,
A good question. We did receive a question about that actually this week from some libraries in the northern suburbs. And so we did reach out to Julie Tappendorf at Ansel Glink just to kind of get a little bit more information from folks about what they should really be thinking of when they're thinking about talking about this issue. And so the two things she really said people need to be keeping in mind are, one, anything that is coming in the context of lobbying. So obviously, if you're a public organization like a library or a library system, you don't employ a lobbyist. You don't want to be participating in activities that come under the kind of definition of lobbying. But just awareness about an important federal agency that sort of affects libraries is not lobbying in and of itself. Just making sure people are aware of how those things are doesn't cross that line. But if there is any activity sort of moves into the lobbying arena, it's best to leave that to ILA, who does employ a lobbyist. So that's one piece that we certainly received. The other is more around political activity, and that is specifically focused with people who are under election and endorsements for election, and making sure that no public agency is moving into that sort of direction of that. But we do recommend, as we always do, that if any library is considering activity and they're wondering whether or not it falls under those umbrellas, that they consult with their own lawyers, make sure that they feel comfortable in how they move forward. But simply talking about, you know, these issues and how this impact is seen by libraries, that's important information that I think is important to share.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the likely impact is if they do not in September reauthorize?
So I'm just going to start by saying, like, as you all know, we are funded by the Illinois State Library through a grant process. And so decisions about funding that's not received federally does come down to decisions that are made by the Illinois State Library. They are thinking carefully about that. Greg, I don't know if you want to speak to that piece at all.
Yeah, I think in the longer term future, that's yet to be determined, quite honestly. I mean, that is being reviewed and discussed. Of course, we have to keep in mind that the state library, the Secretary of State's office, is just a piece of the federal grant funding that comes to the state of Illinois. The governor's Office of Management and Budget is compiling all of that information now on what is the statewide impact. So, you know, we are part of that greater budgetary process for the entire state. But we will be included in those discussions. So It is yet to be determined how that can be all offset, could be all offset with state funding.
And that's just because we might have a Secretary of State who's willing to allocate those funds, right? Not
Certainly
every
that-
state is going to be in the same position.
Not every state in the US is going to be in that position. That is correct.
I just wanted to thank you, Greg, for mentioning the other things that the IMLS funds, which is also really important in Illinois, that just like millions of dollars come to Illinois for the other grants and programs that the IMLS does. Which maybe don't impact Rails as directly, but definitely impacts our state. It's basically the major source for funding for research in libraries and how libraries work, and different researchers and other programs in Illinois use it quite a lot.
Illinois is a big participant in that. That is correct.
I think one really important thing for people to keep top of mind, because I think it's really difficult to hear these things, but I think we also need to recognize that a lot of the money that is coming to, especially through the Grants for States program that we can speak to, that's coming through the state library to places like the systems, has huge fiscal benefits for the state of Illinois. And so in many ways, that's what we really tried to get across with the value of libraries piece, and that is still available on our website if anybody wants to use that. But I think when we talk about libraries, we also have to talk about the incredible value that comes from local communities and how in times of uncertainty, libraries become even more important. We all know, especially those of you who went through the Great Recession in libraries, how important it became for communities to come to their libraries, use their libraries, and use those resources when they didn't have the types of resources that maybe they had a year or two before. I know when we were talking about the cost of delivery, and you know that $2.5 million that comes from LSTA funding to fund delivery, that's only a portion of delivery. Delivery throughout the state costs about $6.5 million in total. But as Greg mentioned, if delivery went instead to a mailing rate, it would cost $59 million just to mail those same 11.5 million items that moved across the state last year. And if libraries had to buy those materials and weren't able to do that resource sharing at all, it would be $200 million to buy those same $11.5 million conservatively. So a lot of these, we talk about this, but we know it's a very small portion of the federal budget, and it results in these huge values for local communities that they're able to use in ways that are used by everyone in their community of any age. And so I think we just have to get comfortable in talking about things in this way, in talking about the incredible stories and values that hit our communities, but also about the real dollars and cents and value that comes because of these systems that have been put in place and used for years. So I just want to encourage you all to think about your elevator speeches and do that. It's a huge part of being, a system board member, a library board member, a library advocate, is being able to speak to this in ways that people understand.
So we have the September date for the IMLS. What's the timing in terms of the state library budget being created for next year? When does that occur?
For fiscal year 27, the next fiscal year, or the one beginning July 1?
Yeah, the one beginning July 1 and then the 2026 one beginning July.
So the 2026 fiscal year budget is July 1. It is crafted now, and it's dependent upon this award that we're awaiting notification for. Our FY27 budget, we'll be getting work on that right about the time that the IMLS reauthorization is due. So in September and October.
So are there alternative budgets for the 2026 budget? Are there
For 2026 coming up, again, I think that, that's part of the greater state's budget discussion on the total impact of federal funding coming into the state immediately and long term. So certainly that is being reviewed.
Can I ask a piggyback question on that? I heard you saying reviewed in relation to libraries, but how is the state progressing in, I know our budget has been passed by the state, but there are other things that we're waiting to hear about that bigger funding. Do you have any updates on, federal budgets and how that's starting to move forward or not move forward?
Only in relation to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and that is kind of all on hold. I don't really have good information about the federal budget in its entirety. Because, the changing executive orders change that landscape, and I don't know where they are in finalizing anything through the Federal Office of Management and Budget in regard to the continuing resolution that did pass on March 14.
So in terms of lobbying versus information, it seems to me that a very effective form of using information would be if everybody could basically tell their communities like exactly what happened. I know we can't be precise, but in order to say, because there's a lot that gets funded and things are overlapping in grant, but to be able to say, if this happens, we will no longer have X or Y or something like that. And just leave it at that and let people say, oh, what can we do? Well, we would need this to be reauthorized or something like that, and let people kind of organize in other spaces where those things happen.
Yeah, and in your packet, you saw that there was that 2-pager that came from the Illinois Library Association. That really breaks down onto one page exactly what all of that IMLS funding is. And that's something that is, while it was in your packet, it's also available on the ILA website. You can print that out, you can share it. That's a really easy thing to just kind of grab and show all of that. The email that came out from the secretary yesterday also kind of goes through, especially the grants to states program, exactly how that's impacted. And I know ILA is also in the process. We're actually working with them along with Heartland to organize a series of visits for each federal legislator across the state, just to make sure that they all receive a visit from someone and a small group of folks to make sure that they're hearing directly about the impacts that this will have on libraries across Illinois.
I've seen a few different states and again, social media, some of the different library groups where there are joint statements coming out from state libraries. The Indiana Library Federation is doing a significant amount of work. My favorite one was from the State Library of Michigan, and then they're like other associations and things like that. Is there any drive in Illinois for our large organizations to do some kind of joint statement that's being, it would be very easy for my library, for example, to share a joint statement instead of doing something individually, right? Because we're proud members of Rails, ALA, ILA. Those are all things that we're happy to do. But it would be great to hear some advocacy from our state librarian, our Illinois State Library, et cetera, that we could pass forth to the public.
I haven't heard anything about a joint statement necessarily, although we're certainly all working together on
Like the
statements.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How do we put it forward, I guess, is the real question.
And you feel that a joint statement that was signed off by all organizations would have a more effective sort of ability to be shared or pushed than some of the individual statements that you've seen?
And I would even put on top of that, our governor in Illinois is advocating for Illinois beliefs across the country. I think I just read he's in Mexico advocating for trade right now, which is amazing. I'd sure love to hear libraries fall into that, wonderful, amazing parade he's leading. And it would be nice if he had something that said, hey, your joint organizations, your people, we don't only live here, but we work here. We volunteer here. Might be kind of nice to see something like that from our big gathering spaces.
mean, I do want to say, I think that Secretary Giannulli is sending out a message, and having the Secretary of State send out a support like that is a huge thing. And certainly things that we're not seeing in other states. And so having that support is really helpful. I would be happy to go to ILA and see if they have an appetite or an interest in a joint statement. I'm sure there's plenty of other organizations that we've been talking with that might have an interest in coming together on something like that too. Great.
Just a question on Friends of the Library. Since they're 501c3s, can they do different types of communication with patrons than libraries?
Can't advocate.
They can't advocate here. Do they fall kind of under the same rules as?
As a 501c3, less than 10% of their budget in any given year, or was it 10 or 5? It's a small percentage of their income for the year can be used for any kind of political purpose. I think it might only be 5%. And that's their income for the year. It's not like their endowment or whatever.
Okay.
So
if it was
and-
really
and
inexpensive.
too.
Okay.
And not all libraries have funds.
Right.
Well,
Right,
and
right.
that's actually for a foundation that's a 501c3. They can put together a political action committee, file separately, that then they can do political fundraising and spend money for a political campaign out of that fund of the 501c3 charitable organization.
So smart. Thank you.
Been there, done that.
Thank you, Julie.
But can the Friends be another vehicle to? I guess it's what counts as lobbying. Or can you use your friend's mailing list to say, did you know that the IMLS pays for this?
I'm like, if you're stating facts, because I know for like elections, you can only do, like if you were doing a referendum, you have to state the negatives and positives. You can't just gear towards one. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things to think about. Greg, question. By any chance, like when would we know, well, I probably would not be part of it, but when would the rail board or Monica would know how close, if worst case scenario in September? Like, I don't want to, I think I'm going to use, I think Amanda's word from, I think the last board meeting or 2 board meetings ago, the vibe. When do you get the vibe that it's not going where it's supposed to go? And not doing like fear mongering.
I think it will be during the fall. We'll have a good idea of the direction. I don't want to say a definitive date or long term. I think we would know. I mean, because I suppose there is a chance that the authorization would expire, but it could still be picked up in October or even November. And we will understand better long-term implications then.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to add, because I didn't mention it to Monica, I did appreciate Alexi Giannullis's letter at the end where it stated, if you have any questions, you can go to Greg. This is Greg. And I'm like, oh man, poor Greg again. But thank you so much. Obviously,
It's been a day.
Yeah. Obviously, you received an email from me. I just, again, I want to do it also during the board meeting. I want to thank you and your whole staff member. I want to thank again, Alexi Giannullis. You guys are working very hard to making sure that all libraries, our concerns are a little lowered. I know we're all taking blood pressure medication, a little extra these few months, but again, thank you so much. The hard work, we can see it. We can tell you, we honestly appreciate everything and we are behind you 100%. So however you need us, just let us know. And if we can do a letter where we can support other organizations in one letter would be great, because at the end of the day is you guys deserve all the kudos going your way. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments to Greg or the State Library? All right, we're gonna move on to is Greg joining us for this one? Is he? Greg, will you be joining us for the next? Greg, you're probably busy enough. Thank you so much, Greg.
I can
He's like,
stay
"No,
for a while. I'm
Okay,
monitoring.
it's up
email
to
while I'm-
you. If you
I'm
have to
sitting
take
here.
lunch, go ahead. So the next topic is obviously it falls in line with what we've already been discussing, so it might not be that lengthy. This is just for discussion. This is for the IMLS impacts of Illinois. Monica will be covering this one.
And we really did cover
Yeah.
so many of these pieces of it. I just did want to say, because we haven't said this yet, we are preparing the Rails budget as we speak. You'll be seeing versions of that, including kind of an update that's coming forward in May and June. We are assuming level funding. And so we're going to be, presenting a budget with that in place. If you have questions or as things change throughout the next couple of months, feel free to reach out. Happy to share anything that we can. But as Greg said, they have heard that they are going to be receiving their 5.7 million that they're expecting by April 22nd. So all things being equal, that would affect money that's heading into next fiscal year. We also have had some really great conversations at the ISLAC level, and there has been a lot of support shown for the work that is happening at the systems, along with a lot of work that's done by the Illinois State Library. So I just want you all to know that a lot of this is being considered very carefully, and we're going to continue to move forward in the way that we always have.
All right, great. If there's, do we have any questions, concerns? Obviously, I think we already spoke everything about it. We will move on to new business. All right, procedures for board appointments, Monica.
Thank you. So there were a few new things in your packet for this month that are the results of some really incredible work that's been done by your Rails Board committees. And so this first one is coming from the Rails Board Executive Committee. They met on Monday, March 17th. And so after there was a recent appointment process, there was a request, that we update our procedure document about board appointments. That board appointment document had not been updated since 2014. So this that was included in your packet for review was approved by the Rails Executive Committee as presented, and they voted unanimously to approve it for recommendation to the Rails Board. Things that have changed is that there was a section that was added towards the top that specifically looks at vacancies within 6 months or less remaining in a board member's term, and how that would be handled differently than a vacancy with at least 6 months remaining in the board member's term. In addition to what you saw in this procedural change, the committee reviewed sort of the history of Rails nominating and election periods, and we have added some additional items to the election guide as best practices, which includes a nominating period for Rails board elections will be 17 days long, and that the election period for Rails board elections will be approximately 31 days, and that the nomination period for all elections will conclude on Friday at 11:59 p.m. for consistency. Renee is the chair of our executive committee. Is there anything you'd add about this discussion? Anything we?
I want to first apologize because I noticed when I looked at the agenda, all of them were something that I brought up through the 3 years that I've been here. So again, I apologize for making this lengthy for the policy committee. In regards to the board appointments, really, it's just making sure that we're transparent, everything's being kept the norm, and that we're not changing the times and sort of things. I think one of the concerns when we were doing our executive committee was regarding, do we use the current candidates pool to select another one? Do we get into another election if another one's already coming up? So really, this is just for the staff to really just make sure that there's guidelines. And by having these guidelines, they can obviously, there's a little gray area where they can, future board members can change it if they wanted to, really. But again, this is just transparency and making sure that everything is clear and concise, and that there's no surprises in a year, because there's going to be guidance there for people. So again, I greatly appreciate the executive committee, because I think we've met twice in regards to this. Yeah, that's it.
Any questions or comments from anyone on the board about these changes? As a note, this is a procedural document, not a policy, but since it has to do with board activity, we bring it to you for your approval.
All right, may I have a motion, a second, to approve the changes to the procedures for filling board vacancies?
So moved, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Second, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. The motion carries. Yes. Next up, we have Monica with a succession plan. This is another Renee, so I do apologize. We will begin with a discussion that may lead to a possible action. Monica, go for it.
Thank you, Renee. So this one is a long time coming. I know for those of you that have been on the board for at least a couple of years, we've been talking about a formalized succession plan that really goes through a lot of the detail about what would happen in the absence of an executive director for a short period or a longer period. I really want to thank the executive committee for meeting also at that same March 17th meeting to review the executive director succession plan. What I will note is that in addition to what you received here in the packet, along with this part of the formal succession plan includes an updated organizational chart that shows what our regular org chart is, as well as what it would change to under these different scenario. I do also have a 17-page inventory document that goes through all of the different systems, account numbers, other things that we have across our 5 Rails locations so that everything is in one central place that's also included in a document. We didn't want to include that in the packet for obvious reasons, but I just want you to know that that was also created as a result of this succession planning process. I want to thank the Rails staff, especially Sam Daly, along with many other staff members who contributed to this process to make sure that it was as comprehensive and strong as it could possibly be. But what we're presenting for you now is really as a result of what the executive committee discussed and decided as it relates to the executive director succession plan. So I did want to open it up for questions, comments, anything that you would know as a result of the draft plan.
And it's like worst case scenario, if anything happens to Joe and Monica in a boat trip, this, it takes.
Bermuda.
Yes,
Bermuda.
The only thing that struck me as a little bit strange was the completion of short-term emergency succession period. And it talks about the board, the executive director and board president, and a mutually agreed upon schedule and start date. I'm wondering how that fits in with the HR aspects of that sort of leave. And is that something that we need to call out, that if it is medical in nature, that there would also be the HR aspects that need to be covered? I know Sam is on the call here somewhere, that a return to work authorization would be needed before the president and the executive director were coming up with a start date.
A good point, Julie. So that's on the second page for anyone who's looking for it. No. Or actually, sorry, it may not be the second page. I think it's third page. And most of the way down, it's completion of short-term emergency succession period. So Julie, if I'm understanding your suggestion correctly, it would be to add maybe something like with discussion with human resources or something like that to the paragraph.
Of their HR if applicable, the completion of their family medical leave authorization, return to work.
Sam, are you able to speak on the call?
Sure. I was going to say that I think there is a portion, I don't have the succession planning document in front of me right as we speak, but I do know that there was a section in there where I had incorporated language that talked about human resources being in collaboration with that communication dependent on the type of leave period that the person has established. We don't really talk about return to work paperwork per se, because that's a part of our own standard practice of procedures regarding medical leaves. But it does in some way, I do recall, I incorporated language stating that you would have to be in collaboration with HR determining on the type of leave that's requested. So that
Sam, you're right. That's in the completion of long-term emergency succession period. And that line says, before confirming the return to work, it's important the board president work with human resources to set a schedule, responsibilities, transition, and a plan for communication to the rail staff. So we could just essentially take that paragraph and add it to the short-term section. Would that work, Julie?
Yes, that was exactly what I was looking for in the paragraph, in the section above.
Yeah, that should be perfect because it does fall within the same guidelines.
Great suggestion. Other questions or comments?
My only question was, are you sure you want to review it annually? Seems burdensome. My own library, we review it triennially, but I'm just thinking about the executive committee.
Yeah, my easy answer would say I'm not gonna be here for that. But I don't have a comment. I don't know. I don't know how to respond to that. Any of the executive committee members want to speak up in regards to that? I think we were just in agreement in regards to just, they can probably bring it up to review when we do, because they meet more than once a year. So it could just be in addition to something else that's already been discussed in regards to policies.
Renee?
Yeah.
I was thinking, because you're not going to be here and the executive committee changes from year to year, that, maybe yearly, it might be okay to just look at it so that who's ever on the committee is very familiar with it.
Yeah.
Even if they don't make any changes.
I'm gonna agree with Karen here. No, that's actually a solid, I'm like, it's,
Down.
there's always a different executive committee every year. So even if they have to cover at least one, like I said, they meet more than once a year, so it could just be something of a norm. And things do change. Obviously with what we just passed before in regards to the procedures and elections, things change. So sometimes things need to get discussed with the state library too. So at this moment, we won't change that aspect. I know we'll change I'm gonna make a motion, or I'm gonna request a motion in regards to Julie's request as to updating or doing some revisions. Monica, does anyone else have any questions or other concerns in regards to this before I continue? All right, Monica, can you go over as to what revisions specifically so that everyone's clear?
Yeah, so the revision that we will be making is to add a section confirming that the board president will work with human resources when setting a schedule, under completion of short-term emergency succession period. And that would reflect the piece that's in the completion of the long-term emergency succession period.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion in a second to approve the rail succession plan with the revisions that Monica just went over? May I have a motion?
So moved, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. Second? Thank you, Karen. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, the motion carries. Thank you again. Let's move on to the next item for discussion. Ethical artificial intelligence policy with Monica.
So this is a result of work that was done by our Rails Board Policy Committee, who is a very hardworking committee. I'll say a lot of the work that they're doing is working on the handbook that you all do not see from week to week. This ethical artificial intelligence policy will also be a part of the staff handbook, but because this is a brand new policy, we are bringing it to you all for review and potential approval today. So this was a result as a request from the board to have a policy that focused on artificial intelligence. a lot of work went into developing the right kind of policy for Rails. And specifically, we ended up focusing our attention on ethical use of generative artificial intelligence by staff members. We looked at some samples by some of our kind of regular users that we follow, but they didn't really get at what we wanted to get at. And so with the help of a lot of the Rails staff, and especially Joe Philippek, we identified some policies that were used by municipalities, mostly in the Silicon Valley area, along with some that were on the East Coast, that really focused on principles around artificial intelligence use. One of the things we want to make clear is that we understand that the use of artificial intelligence changes rapidly, as well as potential sort of legislative action as it relates to artificial intelligence. So one of the pieces that we include here is that we will create a procedural document that will go into more detail about how we use these things as an organization. But in addition to that, we are going to review this policy with the policy committee annually, so that as changes need to be made, that we'll be able to incorporate those. And of course, as legal looked at this, we will continue to make sure that additional procedures will be developed as necessary in adherence with recommendations and requirements of state, local, and federal law. So that's sort of what I have to share with you about how we created this document, but I did want to open it up in case anyone has questions or comments about this policy. Or if our chair for our policy committee has anything, Gwen, that you want to share.
Just a comment. I think this is a very good policy, and thank you to the policy committee and Rails staff for the work they put into developing this. I've looked at a lot of AI policies from other libraries as we're working on drafting one at Cullen Plum right now. And I think a lot of them really get lost in the weeds of specific tools or use cases. And this is a good high-level overview, again, focusing primarily on ethics and paired with some more procedural guidance that can be updated more regularly. I think this is a really good approach.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, great. We'll move on. All right, so may I have a motion and a second to approve the ethical artificial intelligence policy? Alex?
And Jean.
Thanks, Jean. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you, Emily. And any opposed? Say no. All right, the motion carries. Thank you again. Let's see. As we already discussed, agenda item 8.4, move on to the board development with Brian Smith. We'll talk about the digital accessibility. Brian, you're up.
Let's share my screen here. All right, it's working. Yay. I'm not used to having only one screen in front of me. I usually have three screens. I'm going to talk about website accessibility mostly as it concerns Rails websites. I'd like to start out saying I am not an accessibility expert, but several people above me on the Rails organizational hierarchy have stressed that I am the closest thing that we have. Which is why I'm here talking to you. I also want to mention that when I say website accessibility, I'm using that as shorthand for also including apps, other communication tools that we use that are online. So what is web accessibility? If you look at like official definitions, it talks about ensuring that people can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with everything that's on the website. And that's kind of just a fancy way of saying that it's like everybody should be able to use the website regardless of any physical disabilities. And there are rules about website accessibility. The Americans with Disability Act, Title II, it includes online facilities in what needs to be accessible. Last April, the United States Department of Justice issued a rule that gave more details on what is expected of state and local governments. regarding digital accessibility. And that rule references the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And the state of Illinois, this isn't, technically a rule, except as it concerns state government resources. The Accessibility Technology Act office has a really great document that's a manual on how and why to implement certain parts of the website accessibility guidelines. It's in really clear, plain language. It's an extremely useful resource. A link to that and information about all these other things are on the Online Accessibility Library Pulse page that's on the Rails website. And so there are all these rules saying, like, yeah, for accessibility, do this, do this, do this. But it's not really about needing to follow rules because it's all about people. We want people to be able to use what we provide to them. Wasn't that one of Raghunathan's laws was save the time of the user? And that's part of what that's about, regardless of, whether there are legal requirements. It's the right thing to do, as mustache hero Wilford Brimley said in television commercials 35 years ago. I know, I am an old person. Now, the Rails website, the current website we have, we did a redesign that launched about 2 years ago. And when we were planning that whole process, I mean, we built accessibility into our whole process of creating this new website design. And so we made a number of decisions throughout the process. When we were putting together the RFP to send out to prospective vendors to work for us on the design, we required compliance with accessibility guidelines in the RFP, which I recommend that every library should do that if you're redoing your website. Also in RFP, we also specified that we wanted to use the US Web Design System, which is a library of code developed by the United States government, used in a lot of US government websites. If you ever see a government website that has a little thing across the top that says, this is a US government website, click here to find out what that means. That's using US Web Design System. We wanted to use that because the US Web Design System code, it kind of defines what various components of a web page do and how they look and how they act. And that has a lot of accessibility just built into that code right there. We also decided to use a font called Atkinson Hyperlegible for most of our text on the site. That's actually the same font I'm using here in this PowerPoint. Atkinson Hyperlegible was developed by the Braille Association. And a really cool thing about it is every single character looks different. Every single character has a distinct look. You can see here a lowercase letter L looks very much different from a numeral 1, and both of those look different from an uppercase letter I. And it's a font that I really like a lot. So we are using it on the Rails website. While building the website, we installed a plugin. We use Drupal, the Drupal website software, and there's a plugin called Editoriali. A11Y is shorthand for accessibility, and that's a plugin that our content editors have access to that provides an indicator on a blue check mark that, hey, everything on this page looks okay. A yellow question mark if, oh, there's something on here that you might want to look at. Or very rarely we see a red exclamation point, which is, oh, Brian really needs to look at this. And so even after, we launched a website, it's a continuous process of maintaining and improving accessibility. As I just hinted at, anytime an issue is noticed and reported, we look at that right away. Last fall, we had an accessibility expert at our support vendor do a review of the main Rails website, and we've remediated most of those issues that had been identified. There are still things we're working at that concern certain specific content. We've also put into use some additional tools for checking on accessibility. NVDA is free software that it's a screen reader that reads out loud what happens on your website. And there are times that you play that and it's like, oh, wait, is that really what's going on there? Andy, A-N-D-I, that's another free tool that the Social Security Administration has made. And we've recently bought a subscription to Pope Tech, which is kind of like a bulk accessibility checker where we can check an entire website without having to look page by page. And it does provide report with page by page what its findings. And I've run some of our service specific websites, Inky.org, My Libraria's website through that, and remediated issues there. Also recently, Rails has a digital accessibility committee with staff. And that, as it should be, is an interdepartmental team. It's not just IT, not communications. We have people from administration, human resources, continuing education, IT, data analysis, resource sharing, communications. And part of what this committee is charged with is, coming up with a roadmap for improving our accessibility, because it's not just the Rails website, but other online things that we have available as well. Identifying high-level issues. For example of a high-level issue might be, okay, we have all of these, we do all sorts of video. Live video streaming, recorded video. How is what we do for captioning video is, do we need to pay any attention to that, those? And the committee will also be coming up with guidelines, best practices to use internally, working on staff training, and also look at third-party products and vendors, including not only those that we use internally with Rails, such as, say, Zoom, but also third-party products that we arrange group discounts for our member libraries for. Last thing I want to say is there's no shortcut to accessibility. Even though there are accessibility guidelines, it requires human implementation and review. You can use automated tools. They're not going to catch anything. Even if you're technically complying with the accessibility guidelines, you can still be failing to be accessible. An example is alternative text on an image. That's a very basic accessibility principle, that if a picture on the website is not purely decorative, there needs to be alternative text that gets read to screen readers describing what's in the image. You can have a picture of me, and if the alternative text just says, get a load of this guy, that's not going to be very useful to at all. And also, even using automated tools, you still need to do manual testing. NVDA, which I mentioned, is extremely useful for, kind of hearing. It's like you hear what your website looks like. And it's also a very useful exercise to try using a website without a mouse, just by navigating around using arrow keys. And for things like media, like video, turn the sound off. Do the captions make sense? And these are things that, yes, an actual person needs to do. And that's all I wanted to say. and I'm here if you have any questions to ask. I want to point out again that we have the Digital Accessibility Library Pulse page on the website, which has lots and lots and lots of information.
Brian, I'm just impressed with the fact that you kept your composure. And you kept going after something might have happened outside this building. And the one thing though, to going back to what you discussed, I'm just impressed with the fact that there's a committee, an accessibility committee in regards to all the different departments. So that's amazing. Just because again, Rails covers so much. So it's just to know that every department is given that same type of respect, making sure that not only is it Explore More Illinois, it has to do with also the marketing aspect of it, the website. So just all around, just amazing. And thank you so much for sharing that. Does anyone else have anything to add? Go
I
ahead.
have a question which partly comes up just because of working with this at my own library. Does Rails have certain standards or things that you do for the captions for videos?
That's one of the things that the Digital Accessibility Committee is going to be working on.
Okay, great.
We do regularly use captioning, but it's not to a certain standard, so I know.
And I have to say that in the videos that Ola produces, she does a fantastic job of captioning.
Yeah, and if you watch even things like the Rails Minute videos, there's automatically captions that come on in an effort to
Can't take them off.
Well, I just, I know like our library's website, the Rails library website has an awful lot of linked PDFs, linked documents of various kinds, including spreadsheets. And I know that that can be a huge undertaking to make every single one of those accessible as well, which is what the standard tells us. And I just want to thank you all for starting that with the, what is that, next week? 2 weeks from now, they're doing an accessible, making accessible PDF is coming up. And so thank you. We are actively using these resources in preparation for our own accessibility. So good luck. This is huge. And if your library has not started this process, you need to start now.
I'm just hoping they don't cancel the whole thing after Rails finishes. All right, sorry, Brian. Karen.
I just, you had mentioned very early on something about looking at government, like .gov websites.
Yes.
Does that make a difference in terms of accessibility? Like, if like a library, we're going to transition to a .gov, or if Rails could even be a .gov, I think, couldn't it?
There would be a process to go through.
Does that impact accessibility?
No, it's the type of government agency that you are. I mean, the website domain does not impact that at all. Yeah, the Department of Justice rules, specifically say that, the what are called the WCAG website content or
Web content
accessibility guidelines, 2.1 level AA. So those are specified. There are some exemptions in the Department of Justice rule. For example, if we have all these PDFs on the Rails website from board meetings from 5 years ago, and it specifies, it's like, oh yeah, if it's just a regular old document, you don't need, and it's in the past, you don't need to worry about remediating those. But that's still one of these high level issues that we'll need to revisit at Rails, where it's like, do we want to keep all of these possibly non-accessible documents on our website? So yeah, the website domain has nothing to do. And as I had mentioned before, that it's the right thing to do, whether there's a rule or not.
Okay, great. And just side note, Joe, are we good with continuing? We're almost at the end. Okay.
It's expensive. You'll find out next month, but I don't. no reason to think that yeah.
It wasn't a delivery truck, right?
No.
Okay, good. At least that. Heard too many accidents. All right, so next we have board member reports. This is the fun part. This is the opportunity for board members to share what's happening at their libraries. Come on, guys.
So I had
Hey.
a lot of details, so I had to. Okay, so the Wilmette Public Library was just named Advocate of the Year by the Northern Suburban Special Recreation Association. And is being celebrated at their Shining Stars Awards and Recognition Banquet. This award recognizes the library's profound impact on the NSSRA community, specifically staff's efforts to create safe, inclusive spaces and programs for participants and demonstrating our values with compassion. The NSSRA provides and facilitates year-round recreation programs and services for children, teens, and adults with disabilities. It is an extension of 10 park districts, 2 cities, and 1 village in the northern suburbs of Chicago. So there were several people involved: shelving, adult team, youth, digital, maker services, the safety team, and our library. We're very proud, especially of the coordinating and the advocacy efforts of our community engagement librarian, Sarah Jo Zakahara.
Congratulations. All right, great. Let's see, we're gonna do, next up is a meeting recap and agenda. We are hitting the road once again. And, closer to Emily this time, so Emily will probably be walking to the Rockford Public Library. Am I right, Emily?
Yay!
Not that Emily, the other.
Like your foot shouldn't be.
There you go. Thank you, Emily, for sharing that. I'm like, I knew she's still on Zoom. We host our next meeting on Friday, April 25th, 2025. The April agenda will include an e-read Illinois update with Anna Beam and HR update with Sam Daly. The day will start with a tour of the newly renovated facility, followed by networking and lunch, and then the meeting at 1 o'clock.
Hey, Renee.
Thank you all. Yes.
Sorry, just to interject, the location for the April meeting is not updated on the website. Just FYI.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you.
Greatly appreciated. That probably would be important. Thank you so much. Like always, thank you again for your attendance. Have a nice weekend. I adjourn this meeting at 2:41 p.m.